Hi, my name is Jess Lewis, and today I'm going to talk about democratisation and how it can power advocacy. I've spent 10 years working in the research operations space, specialising initially in user recruitment, and now I am a research operations generalist, which means I cover all aspects of the research operations role. I grew up in a small village nestled between two national parks in the northwest of England. And sheep farming is one of the main industries up there, and you'll understand shortly why I've mentioned this. The three main topics of my talk are democratisation is a tactic, thinking in risks and not threats, and the end goal is access to research. Firstly, democratisation as a tactic. I'd like us to reframe democratisation for it to be seen as a tool that people, especially research operations folk, can utilise rather than something that's a strategic choice. And the reason that I don't think democratisation should be the strategy, people are going to do it anyway. Whether or not you have the word democratisation in your strategy, people will do user research. And the reason is, I think it's well enough established now how important some aspect of research is to internal business decisions. There are common research behaviours that happen in many businesses. For example, stakeholder discussions, requirements gathering, A/B testing. These are all ways in which people such as product managers, business analysts, and developers can get to know a bit more about their users. How are people using our products and services? How well is our service working for them? But these research behaviours are not the same as user research. And seeing these behaviours grow doesn't necessarily mean that that traditional view of democratised research, that more people doing research, it doesn't mean that it's a success. It doesn't mean that the quality of research is actually going up. And this is why I want to reframe it to a tactic. And that's what also brings me back to sheep. The last time I was up north, I came across a really common scene. Lone sheep had escaped from a field. It was just doing its job, which was to find the best grass. And it's the same as any other business process. There will always be people who look for a different route, an alternative way, a workaround. And that's why I think research operations, supporting democratisation in that traditional sense of enabling more people to do research, is a really difficult task to set yourself. Instead, seeing democratisation as a tool you can use is a much more helpful framing. It enables you to think about risks instead of threats. That traditional view, and I think perhaps a previous misconception of democratisation, it meant that anyone, no matter their role, could do research. Now that, I think in some aspects, can feel a bit threatening to researchers. It can potentially look like it's devaluing the work of researchers, perhaps diluting down the value of research even by suggesting that anyone can do it, regardless as to their skill set, and also potentially puts pressure on other people outside of research to do research, even though maybe they don't feel particularly comfortable with all aspects of the end-to-end research process. Lisa Reichelt, who coined the phrase research democratisation, has also written about some of the challenges and the organisational forces which are at play that impact the way in which democratisation is adopted and embedded. And these forces aren't necessarily within your sphere of influence or control. Let's take things back to the definition of the word democratisation and the simple act of making something accessible to everyone. And if you think about risks, they can be managed and mitigated. So thinking about if you were to make your research process transparent so that anyone can take a look at how you've come to those insights, what are the risks posed by opening that up? What are the risks posed by opening up your research repository so that anybody can come and watch previous research sessions? What are the risks that you need to then look at managing? And I also really like this quote from Ed Lyon, who is research operations at Wise. He was talking on a webinar recently about democratisation, and he said that it's a mindset, prepare for it, embrace it. And it got me thinking about what are the ways in which, as a research operations person, you can be prepared and embrace democratisation and more people accessing the research process, and that was thinking about the risks. And again, going back to my sheep analogy, I don't know if this is just something that happens at country fairs in the Northwest, but if you've ever seen a sheepdog herding sheep, with simple instructions from the farmer, the sheepdog slowly nudges the sheep this way and that until they are gradually rounded up in a pen. And again, this framing of democratisation being a tool gives you that same thinking of, instead of trying to encourage everyone to do research, you're thinking about how is research being accessed by people? How can we help to nudge them in the right direction so that they can utilise this research to ultimately result in better informed decisions that result in more user-centred products? So that brings me on to my last point, which is the goal isn't necessarily to get more people doing the research, it's just to get more access to research. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means now. So I talked about advocacy. Now I think it's worth just explaining what that means and my understanding of it, because I don't think it's necessarily talked about a great deal, but advocacy to me is something that underpins every other aspect of research operations, and it's so important in the work that I do to have great advocates to build those relationships within the business. This model that I'm showing here is from a Nielsen Norman Group blog post, and in the post they say advocacy is concerned with how the value of UX research is defined and communicated to the rest of the organisation. So great advocates and good relationships, it can open lots of doors. Democratisation enables you to show people, not just tell them about the value of research. So I'm going to give you an example of how that happened. So I support a squad who have a brilliant culture of building research into the product development process, but there are opportunities to increase the rigour of research and make some aspects more accessible and create more space for that research to happen. So there was a squad day back in May, and I knew it would be a cross-functional group of people all in one place, in person. And just like the pre-COVID days, I wanted to create a group observation experience. This is something that is really tricky to do in a remote hybrid working world that many companies now exist in. So the end goal wasn't for people to come away from that experience and go, I can go off and do my own research now. It was to help remind people of why actually this is really important and this is how we're going to make our products better. We created an in-person observation experience by having live research happen on the day, have a group of people in a room and watch the session on a big screen. We then had a group discussion afterwards, again, a cross-functional group of people immediately after observing research, having a conversation. Again, something that we don't commonly do anymore. And it was really successful. It sparked a brilliant conversation. Things were taken away from that and taken into work streams. And I think there's a real appetite, I hope, to do something similar later in the year. And doing this work helps you to build that crowd of advocates. It helps people understand, actually, those people organising who saw me organising the research for the squad day understand how much goes into each research session that you coordinate and the work that has to happen around either side of the research. And part of increasing accessibility is helping to educate people and compliance, taking a slide deck to go, these are the steps that you have to do to organise research. So that's a bit boring. Whereas actually taking people on that journey and showing them the work that you're doing is so much more powerful and memorable. And ultimately gets you to your end goal of having all the research happen in a more systematic way, having research joined up, having people walking along the same kind of route with how they're approaching their research. It enables you to play to people's strengths as well, working more closely with them. You're not putting the pressure on people to do research, something that maybe they don't feel comfortable with, or working with them more closely to support them in that end-to-end process and the steps that they're not necessarily as comfortable with. So democratisation is a tactic. Think about the risks that you can manage. It's not a threat. And think about access to research rather than encouraging more doing of research. Thanks so much. I'm Jess Lewis, and you can find me on LinkedIn and Medium.